Have you ever wondered why some of the world's most famous actors, people who could live anywhere from Beverly Hills to the French Riviera, are quietly choosing the Philippines as the place to build their second homes? At first, it sounds almost unbelievable. Why would someone who already has everything, luxury estates in Los Angeles, penthouses in New York, vacation villas in Europe, suddenly find themselves drawn to the islands of the Philippines? What if I told you that behind those headlines of glamorous red carpets and multi-million-dollar contracts, there are Hollywood stars who, in the quiet of their personal lives, are seeking something much deeper, something they claim they can only find in the Philippines? It may surprise you to know that a few years ago, a certain Academy Award-winning actor, let's call him Daniel, not only visited the Philippines for a short project, but ended up purchasing a beachfront home in Palawan. And when a journalist asked him why, his answer wasn't about tax breaks or investment opportunities. He simply said, "I've never felt this kind of peace before. It feels like home, even though I'm thousands of miles away from where I grew up." That simple confession caught people off guard, because in the world we live in, we often assume that happiness is tied to wealth, fame, and power. But here was a man who had it all, admitting that what he truly longed for was something he only discovered among the coconut trees, small fishing villages, and smiling faces of the Filipino people. And Daniel is not alone. More and more Hollywood actors are being drawn to the Philippines. Some arrive expecting nothing more than a quick vacation, a few photographs for social media, and perhaps a chance to escape the paparazzi. But what they encounter here often changes them in ways they cannot explain. It begins with small details, the sound of children laughing as they play on the streets, the warmth of strangers who greet them with respect, the deep sense of family that permeates daily life. Slowly, the Philippines stops being just another country on their travel list and begins to feel like the missing piece of their own story. Think about it. In a world where celebrities live under constant spotlight, where every move is scrutinized, where trust is rare and loyalty is often bought, what do you think happens when they find themselves in a place where people treat them not as stars, but as fellow human beings? A place where an old man in the market will still scold them for not saying po or opo, and where neighbors bring food to their doorstep simply because it is fiesta day. For someone like Daniel, raised in a culture where fame often creates walls, this was shocking at first. He remembered walking down a small street in Cebu, unnoticed by most. Not because people did not recognize him, they did, but they chose to give him space. A young vendor even whispered to her child, "Let him be, anak, he is also a person." And in that instant, he realized something profound. In the Philippines, he was no longer a Hollywood idol. He was simply a man, welcome at the table, respected not for what he had, but for who he was. This is the beginning of a pattern we are now seeing. From award-winning actresses who fall in love with the serene landscapes of Siargao, to action stars who find themselves humbled by the faith and resilience of Filipino communities, the Philippines is becoming a secret refuge. It is not the kind of place they boast about on magazine covers. It is not the kind of property investment that makes headlines in the Wall Street Journal. Instead, it is personal, almost sacred, a quiet decision to root themselves in a land that gives them something Hollywood never could. Now, you might be wondering, what is it exactly that makes these stars, who could live in the most exclusive neighborhoods of the world, choose a home in the Philippines? Is it the natural beauty, the affordability, the promise of privacy? Those are all true, but every actor who has spoken about it reveals something more. They speak of the spiritual weight of the place, the way sunsets over Manila Bay seem to heal old wounds, the way the voices of a church choir in a small provincial town echo in their hearts long after they leave. And for those of us watching from the outside, It makes us ask, could it be that what the world's most successful people are looking for is not another mansion, not another investment, but the very same thing Filipinos have known all along, the treasure of community, of faith, of simple joy? Daniel once described his first night staying in his Palawan home. He sat on the balcony, the ocean breeze carrying with it the faint sound of children singing karaoke in the distance. The stars above him were brighter than any spotlight he had ever stood under. And for the first time in years, he said, he felt like he belonged to something larger than himself. That was the moment he decided this was not just a holiday. This was where he wanted to plant a part of his life. That decision shocked many of his Hollywood friends. They asked, why the Philippines? You could buy a villa in Tuscany or a penthouse in Tokyo. But Daniel only smiled and replied, you haven't lived until you've sat at a Filipino table and been told to eat more even when your plate is already full. And that's the story we begin today, the unlikely journey of Hollywood's brightest stars, finding their way into the heart of the Philippines, and in doing so, uncovering truths that many of us take for granted. So let me ask you, if people who already have the world at their feet are choosing to build homes here, what does that say about the true value of the Philippines? When Daniel first arrived, he thought he knew what to expect. He had traveled the world, after all. From five-star resorts in Bali to private estates in the Caribbean, he had seen beauty in every form. So when he stepped off the small plane that landed in Palawan, he expected the same: a postcard view, some quiet beaches, maybe a new adventure to brag about. But the Philippines was not a place that fit neatly into his expectations. The first moment that unsettled him came during his very first morning in the village near his new property. He went out for a walk, hoping to stay unnoticed. But instead of curious stares or intrusive questions, what he got was something far simpler. A tricycle driver slowed down, smiled at him and said, "Good morning, sir. Have a blessed day." It was such a small thing, almost ordinary, but for Daniel, it was jarring. Back in Los Angeles, no one ever stopped to wish him blessings. Fame had built a wall around him. Yet here, a stranger offered him kindness as naturally as breathing. That was the first thread that began to unravel his guarded view of the world. A few days later, another moment caught him by surprise. He was invited to a neighbor's home for merienda, just a casual afternoon snack. At first, he hesitated. In Hollywood, invitations often carried strings attached, publicity, networking, or hidden agendas. But this was different. When he entered the small home, he was greeted with wide smiles and the aroma of freshly fried turon. The host, an elderly woman, simply said, "Please eat, you are our guest." Daniel sat on a bamboo chair, eating sweet bananas wrapped in crunchy lumpia, and listened to the laughter of the family. No cameras, no contracts, no one asking for a selfie. Just people sharing food, as if he had always been part of their circle. Later he confessed that it was the first time in years he felt truly invisible. Not as a celebrity, but as a person accepted without question. And then came the moment that silenced him completely. One Sunday morning, curious to see what local life was really like, he followed the sound of church bells and found himself inside a small parish. He stood at the back, not wanting to disturb anyone. But when the choir began to sing, something in him shifted. The voices of ordinary townspeople, singing with devotion, filled the air with a kind of reverence he had not felt in decades. It was not about performance. It was about faith, unity, and the invisible bond that tied the people together. Daniel later described that morning as a turning point. "I realized," he said, "that these people have something we've lost in Hollywood. They know how to belong to each other 3 moments. That was all it took to begin rewriting the script of his heart." And Daniel was not the only one. Take Julia, a well-known actress famous for her roles in romantic dramas. She first visited Siargao for a film shoot. Initially, she was more concerned with her makeup, the lighting, the angles that would look best on camera. But as the days passed, she found herself drawn to the simple rhythms of island life. One afternoon, after filming, she sat by the shore and watched as a group of children played in the waves. They had no toys, no fancy gadgets, just the ocean and each other. Their laughter echoed louder than any applause she had ever received on stage. Julia said she felt something pierce her heart in that moment. "I realized," she whispered to a friend, "that maybe the truest kind of wealth is not measured in money or fame, but in the sound of children who know how to be happy with nothing." And then there was Mark, an action star known for his tough on-screen persona. In Hollywood, his life was a fortress of bodyguards and luxury cars. Yet in the Philippines, he found himself humbled one stormy night in Cebu. His flight had been delayed, and instead of staying in a hotel, he ended up sheltered in a small barangay hall where local families had gathered for safety. Rain pounded the roof. The wind howled. But what struck him most was the way people comforted one another. Sharing blankets, passing around bread, praying together. Mark, who had always prided himself on strength, found tears in his eyes as he realized true strength was not about muscles or power, but about resilience, faith, and community. That night changed him forever. What ties all these stories together is not luxury or comfort, but something much deeper. For Daniel, Julia, Mark, and others, the Philippines began as just another destination. But through small acts of kindness, through the warmth of strangers, and through the undeniable spirit of the people, they encountered a reality that no Hollywood script could ever capture. And for us, watching their journeys, it makes us reflect on our own lives. How many times do we overlook the beauty of what we already have? How many times do we fail to see the treasure in the simple act of sharing food, in the laughter of children, or in the unity of prayer? That is why these stars, despite their wealth and fame, find themselves drawn to the Philippines. Because here, they discover a kind of richness the world cannot buy. They come expecting beaches and resorts, but they stay for something more enduring, the heart of the Filipino spirit. So perhaps the real question is not, why are Hollywood actors buying homes in the Philippines? But rather, what have they found here that the rest of the world has forgotten? The stories of Daniel, Julia, and Mark might sound like isolated experiences, but when you listen carefully, a pattern emerges. Each of them came to the Philippines expecting nothing more than a temporary escape, maybe a vacation or a film project, yet they left with something they could not let go of. It was not the ocean views, not the lower cost of living, not even the luxury of privacy. What captured them was something invisible, an anchor for the soul. Daniel once told a close friend, "I bought my home in Palawan not because I wanted another property, but because I wanted to remember who I am." Imagine that. A man who had spent decades on the world's grandest stages, adored by millions, needed a small fishing village in the Philippines to remind him of his own humanity. That confession alone speaks louder than any Hollywood interview. For Julia, the moment of truth came when she decided to extend her stay in Siargao. Her manager was furious. She was supposed to return to Los Angeles for a commercial shoot worth millions. But Julia quietly said, "No. I'm staying." Why? Because she had begun volunteering at a local community center, teaching young girls about acting and confidence. She said their eyes shone with a kind of hope she had forgotten existed. Those children did not see her as a glamorous star. They saw her as a sister, a teacher, someone who believed in them. And in giving them her time, Julia discovered a joy she had never found on any film set. And then there was Mark. For years, his identity had been built on being invincible, the man who could fight 10 enemies on screen, the face of Hollywood toughness. But that stormy night in Cebu stripped away his image. He saw mothers comforting their children, fathers quietly repairing leaks in the roof, teenagers distributing food to strangers. No cameras, no scripts, just real people surviving together. When the storm passed, Mark said he felt ashamed. "All my life," he admitted, "I thought strength was about control. But here, in this small community, I saw strength that humbled me to my knees." That was the night he decided to invest not in another mansion in Los Angeles, but in a modest property in Cebu, where he could return whenever he needed to remember what true courage looked like. These moments, so simple, so human, are what led these Hollywood names to choose the Philippines, not just as a place to visit, but as a place to belong. And isn't it remarkable? The very things we often overlook in our daily lives, the way we say po and opo, the way neighbors bring food when it's fiesta, the way we gather in prayer when tragedy strikes, are the very things that move outsiders the most. Think about that for a moment. We live in a world that celebrates glamour, wealth, and power. Yet the people who already have all of that are seeking something found in the ordinary lives of Filipinos. They find meaning in the way children laugh, with nothing but sand between their toes. They find healing in the sound of church choirs echoing through old stone walls. They find peace in the hospitality that says, "Kumain ka pa, you are family now." And maybe that is the greatest revelation of all. The Philippines is not simply a country to admire from afar. It is a teacher, a reminder, a living lesson that the true measure of life is not in how much you own, but in how much love surrounds you. Daniel now spends several months a year in Palawan. Julia returns to Siargao every Christmas, not for luxury, but to reunite with the children she mentors. Mark has become an honorary member of a Cebuano community, quietly funding projects that help families rebuild after storms. These are not publicity stunts. There are no press releases. These are choices made in silence, guided by hearts that have been transformed. And here is the part that should stir us most. If outsiders can see the treasure in the Philippines so clearly, why do we sometimes fail to see it ourselves? If those who have everything come here searching for what they lack, then perhaps the greatest riches of this nation are not its beaches or its investments, but its people, their resilience, their faith, their warmth. So the next time you hear that a Hollywood actor has bought a home in the Philippines, don't just think of it as another celebrity headline. Think of it as confirmation of something we already know deep down. This land, with all its struggles and imperfections, holds a power that the world cannot ignore. And perhaps, in the quiet of your own life, you might ask yourself the same question Daniel asked the night he watched the stars over Palawan. What is it that truly makes me feel at home? Because at the end of the day, home is not about walls or roofs. It is about belonging. And the Philippines, in its own humble, extraordinary way, offers that belonging not just to its own people, but to anyone who is willing to open their heart. That is why Hollywood actors are buying homes in the Philippines, not because they need more, but because here they find what money cannot buy: peace, family, and a place where even the brightest stars can finally rest. There is a truth about the Philippines that even Filipinos sometimes forget. Long before skyscrapers rose in Manila, before the world called Boracay a paradise, this land was already sacred. Not sacred because of wealth, but because of the spirit of its people. And perhaps this is why so many outsiders, Hollywood actors, global leaders, and strangers who once thought of the Philippines as just another dot on the map, are finding themselves deeply moved when they step onto its shores. Have you noticed how foreigners often describe the Philippines not with words about buildings or cities, but with words about the heart? They speak of faith, of laughter, of family ties so strong that even poverty cannot break them. They marvel at fiestas where entire communities eat together, at processions where thousands walk side by side, at families who pray together in candlelit churches while typhoons rage outside. For them, it is shocking. For us, it is normal. But sometimes it takes the eyes of a stranger to remind us of the treasure we hold. One Hollywood actress once said, after attending Simbangabi in a small town, "I have traveled the world, but I have never felt this kind of unity." It is as if the whole town breathes with one heart. She was not Catholic, not even particularly religious. Yet the devotion she witnessed touched her more than any cathedral in Europe. She admitted that the Philippines taught her that faith is not about grand rituals, but about community. Ordinary people coming together in extraordinary ways. And that is why these homes that Hollywood stars are buying are not just real estate. They are symbols, quiet declarations that in a world obsessed with wealth and fame, there is still a place where people live by values older and stronger than money. A place where family extends beyond blood, where respect is woven into every greeting, where faith is not just a word, but a way of surviving. History itself tells us this is nothing new. The Philippines has always been a land that surprises outsiders. The Spaniards who first arrived centuries ago were astonished by the hospitality of the natives. American soldiers during the war were stunned by the courage and loyalty of Filipino allies. Even today, global leaders speak of the resilience of the Filipino spirit, often wondering aloud how a people who have endured so much can still smile so brightly. That resilience, that hope, that unshakable faith, this is what Hollywood stars are discovering when they choose to make their homes here. And maybe, just maybe, their choice is also a message for us. In a time when many Filipinos dream of leaving, chasing opportunities abroad, these powerful voices are quietly reminding us. The very things we sometimes overlook are the things the world longs for. They are not buying homes here because of marble floors or infinity pools. They are buying homes here because they want to taste the joy of a Filipino meal, to hear the music of a Filipino church choir, to be surrounded by neighbors who call them kuya or ate with sincerity. One actor described it best. "In Hollywood, I am treated like a god. In the Philippines, I am treated like a brother. And that, for me, is priceless." So the next time we pass by our local markets, hear children playing on dusty streets, or sit down with family for a meal of rice and adobo, let us not take it for granted. Because somewhere out there, a world-famous celebrity is dreaming of exactly that moment, the moment that for us is ordinary, but for them is extraordinary. This is the real power of the Philippines, not its politics, not its economy, not even its natural beauty. The real power is its people. People who know how to live with dignity even when life is hard. People who know how to share even when they have little. People who know how to keep faith alive even in the darkest nights. And if Hollywood stars can see that, then so should we. As we close this story, let me leave you with one question. If the brightest stars in the world are looking to the Philippines to find peace, healing, and belonging, then what excuse do we have to forget the treasure of our own home? Perhaps this is what God has been showing us all along, that the Philippines, though small in size, carries a light so strong it can draw the world's most powerful people to its shores. A light born not of wealth, but of faith, not of glamour but of humility, not of fame, but of family. And maybe, just maybe, the reason Hollywood stars are buying homes in the Philippines is because this country, with all its flaws and struggles, is already a glimpse of something eternal. A reminder that in the end, what matters most is not where you live, but how you love and who you belong to. That is the Philippines. That is home.